Welcome to the best hour of their day podcast with your hosts, Jason Fernandez
and me, Jason Ackerman. With more than 20 years in the business,
as both coaches and affiliate owners,
our passion is to help create world-class affiliates
and coaches by building
better boxes. Welcome to
the best hour of your day. All right, everybody, we are back to talk about money, because when you don't have any money, money sucks. But when you have a lot of money, money's cool.
It is cool.
So
it makes life a whole lot more fun.
Yeah, we're going to talk about, so if you've been listening to any of the podcasts, obviously you guys know who Nick is, Nick True. He's our budgeting coach for Best Hour. He's also does budgets for people all over the world and helps people understand their cash flow so they can keep their money. And what we want to talk about today is we've covered a lot of the why you should budget, the pitfalls of budget in the previous episode. So if you've not watched those, go back and watch those. But we talked a lot about when things are not going well. Let's talk about when things are going well. So you're running your budget. You've got extra cash on hand. I have to take two things into consideration. Now, one is I'm probably going to be staring down the barrel of some tax, payments. And then what do I do with my money after that to either start accumulating wealth or try to, limit my tax liability? Because if you do have cash on hand, there are ways to use that cash in order to limit your tax liability. So, you want to start with taxes first, Nick?
Yeah, we'll start with the fun stuff first, the taxes. Okay. Yeah.
Taxes. Everybody likes
that. So a couple conversations I've been having just with gym owners the last few weeks that I thought would be good to bring up here. And it really centers around how do you know how much to save for taxes? And so like now I'm making money, I'm doing stuff, but now I'm concerned I might not have enough set aside for taxes. How do I know that I'm setting aside enough? The real answer to this question, like the super detailed answer, is you probably need somebody to, like an accountant to sit down and look at your specific situation, right? Because it depends. But I think there's some back of the napkin, like ways that we can get close to help people make sure that at least you don't end up in April getting blindsided, right? And going like, holy cow, like I owe a ton of money and I don't have it and whatever. So this conversation started and got birthed out of like percentage-based budgeting or profit first. Profit first for gym owners is like a popular methodology for running your budget, which is great. One of the things that they advocate in that method is to take a certain percentage off the top, right? So just take a certain percentage off the top of revenue. And this is where things get tricky, because while it's super helpful, I think it just makes it really nice and simple to take it off the top. It does make it, the number can fluctuate a lot depending on how profitable you are. And then also depending on like how much money you, or like if you're married, your spouse makes outside of the gym, right? What tax bracket you're in outside. So a couple of like ways to think about this, and I'm going to get like into some math, real fast. I'm actually, let me just pull up, like for YouTube, I can just share my screen and we can just like show it. So let's see here, share screen. Okay. So let's say that
so we can pull this up. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So let's say that you are, your gym budget, let's say is $20,000 a month. We'll use nice, easy round numbers. And so if you were $20K a month, and let's say that your operating expenses are roughly equal to 75% of that. And so paying the team, paying your rent, your utilities, affiliate fees, insurance, the whole nine. And so that means that your profit in terms of before paying yourself in taxes, right? And so this is where like this word profit, gross profit, net profit, what do you call it? Like, we're trying to like cut through a lot of this. The profit in its simplest form, which is like, if you are a single member LLC and you own the gym, at the end of the day, what the IRS is going to look at as coming to you is really 25% before paying yourself. And so that means that in terms of like your liability, in terms of for taxes, at 20K times 25%, that is roughly, what is that, $5,000?
Yep.
So we're going to say 60K a year. So if this was your only income, and here's like a little, if I change, can y'all see this? Tax.
No, whatever you're doing, I can't see it.
Okay, so let me reshare the whole tab. Percent share window. There we go. Okay, now great. So this little like beforetax.co is pretty slick. It has a pretty slick calculator
Okay.
to get close.
Okay.
And so let's say that I was 60,000 and I was in the state of Tennessee, and we're gonna do the self-employment instead of the S Corp stuff. Okay, so 60K, and this is all that. Okay, and we're gonna add in single instead of married, just as an example, and then hit update. Okay. And so now we can see that our total tax liability is going to be, where's the total?
It looks like about 11K.
Or total tax is 12.3, right? Yeah. And so if I were to come back over here, 12.3 divided by 60 grand equals 12.382 divided by 60 is roughly 20%, right?
20%, yeah.
Great. Okay. I know that was like a ton of math for y'all that are listening to this. Just hang with me.
All of our listeners have now left the show.
Just totally left the show. Hang with me. I'm going to summarize what we've done so far.
So far, this feels like converting pounds to kilograms.
It does. It does. It's a great analogy. It's exactly like that. What we're doing so far is we're trying to figure out, of the profit, of the money that's coming to me, how much should I be setting aside for taxes?
Right.
And the answer is, for a lot of people, 15 to 25%, depending on what state you're in, depending on how much money you're making, right? That's a good ballpark place to start. And the example that I'm giving, it's 20%. Now, most people are not super disciplined about when they personally get paid, taking money and setting it aside for taxes.
Right.
And so one of the ways that we try to get around that bad habit and create more discipline is by taking a certain percentage off the top of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where we're going to get super mathy one last time, which is, if your profit is 25% of revenue and you need to take 20% of profit and set aside for taxes, then if you're looking to percentage of tax savings off revenue, %. So 25% times 20% is 5%. And so for this particular example, if the gym owner just took 5% of top line revenue and set that aside for taxes, they should be more than covered when tax time comes around.
Okay.
Okay, Fern, ask me.
How much is that?
What your questions are?
No. So, I mean, what I was looking at, I was like trying to do some back of the napkin math, which is not my strong suit, but I was like, okay, about $1,000 a month is what it was calculating there.
Yeah. $1,000 a month off of a 20K month budget.
Yeah. Okay. So I was right. Okay. So now what's the easy version of doing this? So anybody who's listening to this, like you're going to have to do some math, and
you're going to have to do some math. Yep.
So there's a couple different questions here. The first one is going to be, should I be conservative? Should I be liberal with my number? Right. So you said 15 to 25, and I'm like, okay, we landed in the middle on 20.
Yep.
Right. I'm going to assume that the general guidance, right, we are neither accountants nor lawyers.
Yes.
That the higher my household income,
yep,
the closer to 25 I'm going to be, and the lower my household income, the closer to 15. I'm gonna be.
And then no income tax state versus tax, high income tax state, right? If you're in California versus if you're in Florida, it's a big difference, right? And so if you're on the lower end of the household income and living in Florida, 15% might be adequate.
Right.
If you're higher income and in California, you might be 30%.
Well,
right? You
that's
might be
probably
higher.
fair.
So it does depend a little bit. And so, but I can tell you just from all the different budgets that I look at, because I've looked at a lot, 20% is a great place to start. And so an easy way to think about this, like super back of the napkin, is 20% times your profit percentage, right? Okay. And so whatever your operating expenses are to run your gym, everything that's left over before paying yourself and before paying taxes is your net profit from a bottom line standpoint. Whatever that is, if you're only making 10% right now, then you only need to save 20% of 10, which is 2% of revenue.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if your gym is like crushing it, you're going to have to save a lot more of revenue. Right. And so the nice thing about doing it this way is I'm kind of secretly sneaking in how important it is to understand your profit margin for your gym, which again goes back to the importance of budgeting and all that stuff.
Right. Right. And so let's just go with this scenario. We're like, hey, we've decided that it is 20% or otherwise it's 5. And okay, well, how do I do that now?
How do we do that?
How do we do it? Right. So like, for those of you that read Profit First, you're like, all right, I do the math, I can push in all the accounts. I will tell people, having done Profit First for many years and then moving to YNAB and using that, it is significantly easier.
Yeah.
Inside of YNAB, all of the accounts are no longer necessary. So all of that, so the transfers back and forth and all the you remove, I don't know, call it 15 to 20 steps a month.
Totally.
With regard to managing your budget. And it just happens on a daily basis. And it's also pretty easy to do in YNAB. I think you showed it to me once and I was like, oh, I get it.
You're like, oh yeah. So let's pop over here. So if I come over to this budget, share my screen. Great. So again, if you're listening to the podcast, this is definitely one where like you probably want to hop over to YouTube at some point and just check this out. So I've got this gym, and the example that I have here, let's make this a little bit more to match the previous example.
Okay.
Is as money comes in the door, it goes into ready to assign. If you're using YNAB, you know what that is. We've talked about this. The new money comes in here. And then before I do anything, before I budget for any of my expenses or anything at all, I'm going to hit this number with my percentages. And so in this case, I've got a 5% profit, a 5% tax, 15% owner's comp, and then I'm operating on 75. And so I would copy this number to my clipboard. And then YNAB, if you're using it, is nice enough you can do the math. And so I'm just going to paste this in, do a little asterisk, 0.05 for profit, asterisk, 0.05 for tax, asterisk, 0.15 for owner's comp. And then the rest is just going to be my operating expenses. And so from here, I can then start budgeting for my rent and my utilities and all of my expenses. But now I'm sort of committing to, and this is what the whole book of Profit First is built off Parkinson's law, which is like forced scarce resources to force you to be creative to make this work. And so
it does work, by the way.
Oh, it totally does.
It absolutely works.
It totally does. And so for this profit, I'm now just going to move that to my, savings. And then this taxes, I'm going to move that down to my income tax savings. Owner's comp, I can take this and go pay myself with it. And then with the rest of the money, I can now use this. I know it's my operating expenses to come down here and start budgeting for
start filling everything out.
All my different buckets. And if I end up with more money after filling up all my buckets,
just move over to November.
Then I can just go into November and start getting ahead on November's affiliate fee and November's building rent and keep cruising until I'm out. So to summarize this little section, back of the napkin, 20-ish% times your profit margin gets you close to how much you should be setting aside for taxes. Because what was happening is I was having some people that were like saving for taxes twice, right? They were saving it off revenue and then they would pay themselves and then they would personally save for taxes from paying themselves. It's like, whoa, no,
got it. Yeah,
you're saving way too much. You don't need to be doing that.
Yeah. Which, saving too much sounds a little silly, but it's kind of a good thing, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's one of those mistakes where I'm like, it ends up kind of being a good mistake.
It does.
Now, there could be downsides to it where you could be saving to a point where now it makes operating budget really challenging, right? You're like, I don't have any money, right? And because you're just saving too much. However, I would prefer that option rather than burning all of your cash and spending it in places that you want. So like if somebody's making that mistake, I'm like, great. It's kind of like in the zone where they were like miscalculating their macro breakdown and they're like factoring in the fat and the protein. I'm like, nope. And then they're like underfeeding themselves. This is kind of the opposite where you're like over saving in that scenario rather than maybe just paying yourself a little bit more money. So if you're going to make a mistake, this is kind of the one. Yeah. Make it in that direction. You're like, oh my God, I saved too much money. Nobody has literally ever been upset about that.
No.
Because then what'll happen is at the end of the year, you'll get to the end of the year and then you can just reallocate it or give yourself a bonus or whatever. But it's there is the point.
It's there.
And now I'm not worried about the tax bill. And then tax season, you're actually like happy. You're like, oh, I have extra money now. Like I don't have to pay whatever, $13,000 in tax. I got to pay $6,000.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. I got one more thing on this topic before we move on to like paying yourself stuff. So this, again, let's go back over here. So let's say that I've been doing this consistently and now I know like, okay, cool. I've got some money here saved up for income taxes. So this is where, again, I'm not an accountant. You should talk to your accountant, but one of the problems with making estimated quarterly payments solely based.
This is such a pain point for me, but go
solely based on last year is that if you have grown, right? If you're doing everything that, you guys are teaching, if you're growing your gym and you're increasing your revenue and increasing your profitability, then you're going to make more money this year than you did last year. Right. Which means if you're basing your quarterly estimates solely based on like last year, you're going to underpay and then you're going to have an underpayment penalty.
Yep.
And you're going to end up owing more money and you're going to be super frustrated. One of the nice things about doing it this way as a percentage is that when it comes time to pay my quarterly estimates, especially if my business is growing really well, then I'm going to pay more than maybe what my accountant estimated for me last year. I'm going to actually just pay whatever's in this bucket.
Right.
I'm going to send that whole thing.
Well, if you decide to do that, I am personally not a fan of quarterly. And I'm going to admit some stupidity here.
This is interesting.
Only because like I was misinformed.
Okay.
I don't even remember when or by who, but just like, hey, you need to do this. To come to find out, you don't. You opt in to pay quarterly taxes, and therefore you can opt to not pay quarterly taxes. And the only reason I'm not a fan of it in general is if I'm saving like this. Well, then when I get to the end of the year, I can pay the tax bill no matter what.
Totally.
But what I don't have the ability to do is execute any sort of further strategy with my cash on hand in order to not
at all
pay higher taxes or pay that full tax bill. That's why I'm not a fan of it. So understand you can only, not only, it is a safe play to not pay quarterly taxes if you are executing this strategy and you're being diligent with, meaning you're not pulling it out and then going to spend it because you're like, oh, well, you got extra money. We'll move it here. Like you must be hyper diligent and be like, that is tax money. It does not get touched. It literally doesn't exist. We're not going to do anything with it. If you do that, this opens up the door for many other things, which is kind of a little bit of a segue into the next piece, which is like, hey, how am I building wealth? And it's just like, there are scenarios like if you are planning appropriately for your taxes, and I'm not just giving it to Uncle Sam, because again, once you give it to Uncle Sam, it's not giving it back to you.
It's gone. Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, we'll get a tax return. I'm like, it's not the same thing, right? Meaning, let's just say that you saved $40,000 in taxes as a gym, right? You're just like, you're running a good gym, you know, you're running $500,000 in revenue and everything's going right. And I got $40,000 tucked away over here. Well, if you paid that $40,000 over the year, you can't do anything with it. Versus if I hold on to it, I can now do another tax calculation and say, well, if I'm able to buy assets with this $40,000, what does that do to my tax liability? It may bring it all the way down to zero. It may be you don't owe $40,000, you only owe 10, right? So you can figure out the math, but that's why I'm not a fan of paying quarterly taxes. But you can only do that. You can, if you're not have a budget and you don't pay quarterly taxes,
Yes.
you're going to get hosed.
Yes,
At the end of the year. And I am speaking from personal experience. I have been the dummy who was not planning appropriately, got to the end of the year and was just like, fuck, I don't have that money. What do I do now? Yeah. And now I've been on the other side too. And I'm like, I do have that money and I would like to not give it to Uncle Sam.
Like,
hey, can you, what are some other strategies I can do? Well, you can do this, this, and this, and this will actually help you out tremendously. I'm like, perfect. I would prefer that option.
Yeah. Agreed.
So
couldn't agree more. So that brings us to our next thing, which is like, this is where like, I'll be interested, Fern, to have this be some back and forth too, and hear like what you're doing and the ways you're thinking about it and maybe what you're saying other gym owners do. But yeah, let's say you're doing all the above. So you've been visioning, you've been planning, you've been budgeting, you've been saving for taxes, and like you're crushing it. And now you actually have a gym that you're really proud of and you're thrilled about and you really enjoy what you're doing. And now you're making more money than you have needed necessarily, rather than just like increasing your lifestyle constantly. If you were like, well, maybe I want to, you know, build some wealth with some of this money and take profits off the table. How do you think about that? How do you get started thinking about that? Do you have some rules of thumb for yourself, and where do you go?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what we do personally. So we have essentially how far ahead do we want to get as the first metric? So it's either 1 month, and you and I, we've talked about this before, 1 month. Our personal goal is 4 months.
Okay.
Right. So we're not quite at 4 months, but then it's like, okay, well, after 4 months, well, then it's game on. We can do any number of things. Now, I will also state inside of that is that inside of that monthly budget, we have allotments of money for investment, right? So we take our pay, we know what we want. So it's kind of like I'm already planning for it, but then once I get to the 4 months ahead,
then it's even more that can go to investing.
Then it's even more. Then it's like way more. Then it like triples, and you're like, okay, well now I can do some crazy stuff. And this goes into like an overarching wealth strategy. And like, what do you want to do? Do you want to put this in? Are you into cryptocurrency? Are you buying real estate? Are, like, what are you doing with it? Are you purchasing another business? Like what's going on there? So that's the way we look at it. So we're kind of doing both, right? We're saving on a monthly basis because we might be paying those out for personal development or whatever, you name it, just anything that would be.
For clarity for folks, when you say we, you mean
my wife and I, yes.
You and your wife, not the gym. Yeah.
Not the gym. Well, they're kind of the same. So they start
flowing in.
Yeah, they start flowing in together. So we view them as one and the same. Because so for an example might be, we do own rental properties, but then we're also looking at this now. It's just like, okay, well, we're one and the same. How do I start to use all of these entities, right? So when you're talking about building wealth, you need to factor your business into that. That should be helping you do that. But then as I start to, make and save more money and then put it in the places that I want, well, what decisions can I make now for myself 5 years from now that would make this even easier? So this is where it gets fun. And you're like, as a gym owner, be like, man, it'd be really great to buy the building.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that is how all of this works, right? If you do not have a plan, you're never buying a building unless you just come into a bunch of money.
Yeah.
So we look at it like that, which is like, all right, well, if we really want to make the gym bulletproof, we should probably own the building, right? That's going to make us as bulletproof as we could possibly be. You know, it's another asset to leverage against if we wanted to do that later on down the road. But that's really the way we look at it, is we want to own the things, because then I'm not, you know, at the whim of the landlord or the market or all this other stuff. Like I can get as much of it, can be as fixed as I want it to. You know, like for most gym owners, your rent goes up 3% every year. Okay, well, what if it didn't?
Yep. Yeah.
What if it didn't go up 3% every year? Like
Yeah.
I would have loved to have my rent 5 years ago. That'd be great.
Yeah.
It's $1,500 cheaper 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So
what does that practically look? So let's say somebody's listening and they're finding themselves in this position and they go, man, I don't even know where to start. Like, I don't know anything about like any of this investing stuff. Like
it doesn't start with the conversation we just had. I will tell you that. It does not. And I will tell you, I think for most people, and I'm always super candid with people, for most people, this is probably a 24-month journey before you really can get your arms around the bear. And you're like, all right, first it took me 12 months to build a habit and really start to understand saving. And I've got my percentages broken down and I'm executing, and I'm starting to reap the rewards of my good behavior. And then you can start to look forward, right? Because after about 12 months of doing this, because I think we've been doing it about 18, just shy of 2 years probably, but you will also have gone through numerous like setbacks or unexpected things at that point. So you'll kind of understand how the game is played inside of this budgeting software. You're like, okay, I now understand I can solve problems and I can get myself back on track and win, at which point you're even more bulletproof. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's where, so it looks like just doing it monthly until you're like, all right, I can operate a functional budget, right? Just like it's the same every month. I can do some minor problem solving, and you just do that for a year, 18 months. And it sounds super tedious, but unless you're like a really high earner, it's probably going to take that long to either.
It'll take a while. Yeah.
It's going to take a while to get your arms around it, maybe to get yourself out of a hole of some sort, whether it's you have a credit card debt or something like that. But everything gets faster if you just stick with it and do the basics, really, really, really well inside of the budget. But I tell people, I'm like, listen, if you get there faster in 24 months, great. But it's probably going to take most people who are earning something between $60,000 to $100,000 2 years before you can accumulate, some sort of cash that you could do some damage with, essentially.
Yeah. So I totally agree with all of that. I mean, it really is just like working out in that way, right?
Yeah,
like
100%.
You can make a lot of gains in your first year, but you're not typically going to get to like where you really dream to go in 12 months.
Right.
Like, it's going to take a while.
It's going to take a while, but here's where I would kind of not make it sound so doom and gloom. You're not going to get there, but I think it is reasonable to say, but by 12 months, it will be the picture will become very clear. Versus like the vague, like, we want to retire when we're 45. And you're like, cool, how do you do that? And they're like, I don't know. We'll just keep saying it every year until it doesn't happen.
Magic. Versus
when you're doing this for 12 years, everything starts to come into focus. You start to understand like, here's what we need to do. Here's where we need to go. Here's how we need to do it. And then it becomes, that's just how we do things now, because I can see the math now works out to map out to this desired end state. And then in my experience, and then other people that I know have done it, it is actually typically faster than that.
Yes. There's some scientific research and backing to what I'm about to say. This isn't me totally just pulling something out of my rear end, but like there's an argument here for the subconscious that's happening when you're working and like when you're consciously focused on something, and then the subconscious that is happening underneath it all when you're sleeping, when you're just kind of going about your day, and like that ultimately accelerates things, right? And so simply the act of being focused on managing your money, budgeting well, using it to get ahead, doing all the stuff that we talk about, you will start, it will become such a bigger part of what's going on, even subconsciously, that if you map out the game plan of like, I'm going to have this much wealth by this much time period, it will often happen faster if you're focused on it.
If you're focused on it. And it starts with you. It's like, there is a gamification to why now, which I think is a large component of why it works.
Yeah.
But we've seen people, we've seen gyms that went from no budget to being 1 to 3 months ahead inside of 12 months.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Totally.
I mean, they're just like, they have no idea. They're not paying themselves, like quit their job. And they're like, I have like almost 2 months saved in the bank, right? Like, do you know how much better you sleep at night?
Oh my gosh.
With that kind of, like, that's because money is every gym owner's nightmare. Let's be honest, but it doesn't have to be. And when you start taking control of it, it doesn't mean you're going to solve it quickly, but like now you at least can control it. Right. So when you rid yourself of the fear of not knowing, you're like, oh, I know exactly what it is. It's not what I want it to be, but at least I know I understand the game now.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm not like, I was listening to something yesterday and it was the difference essentially between the financial elites and everybody else's financial literacy. It's just like, which is crazy. And I would consider myself largely financially illiterate. And I went to a top end, institution for college, and I would still have considered myself financially literate until 24 months ago. I knew enough to be actually extra stupid. And I'll be very candid with everybody. Like, I knew enough to be extra stupid, and my wife is intelligent as well. She went to a very high-end college, but they don't teach you that kind of shit there.
Yeah.
And when you really, and money is a weird one, right? There's a different language there. How it works isn't entirely intuitive. It's all the things, and it seems like an uphill battle, but you can do it. Like, you can learn it.
Go ahead. Sorry.
It's just, but most people don't, because it seems overwhelming, and it's really, it's like, again, it's like working out. The analogies are endless. It's like, it's extra hard on the front end.
I love the literacy thing. So do you ever play board games or card games or anything like that?
Not anymore. I did growing up, but not anymore.
Okay, great. So you'll get the analogy then. So growing up, do you ever remember a time where you maybe learned a new game? Somebody was teaching you a new board game or a new card game or something that you hadn't played before. And 10 minutes, 30 minutes, half an hour, whatever into the game, somebody does something and you're like, whoa, I didn't even know that was allowed. You can just do that.
Right.
That's a lot.
You're like, wait a second.
That's a lot of how like money stuff is, especially when it comes to like tax saving strategies and wealth building strategies. Like there are so many things that you just don't know about that people, and then when you learn it, you're like, wait, what? I didn't, you don't know. And therefore you don't play the game correctly to take advantage of it. Totally.
Right. So, and so the steps are, you need to manage what you have, right? Because if you do want to play the game, make no mistake, you got to have some money, right? Like you can't just magically put tax strategies in place and be like, oh, I saved a bunch of money. That is not how tax strategies work, right? No. Tax strategies are where you use your cash as a lever so that you can pay less taxes. And it's all completely legal. That's how wealthy people get wealthy. Robert Kiyosaki is brilliant at this, and he's been talking about it for 50 years at this point. But he's him, Dave Ramsey. There's a fantastic podcast of Alex Hormozi and Dave Ramsey that if you guys have not listened to it, you should go listen to it. Yeah. It's a fantastic. I had no idea how big his company was, by the way.
Huge.
I'm not talking about Alex Hormozi, everybody. No. I'm talking about Dave Ramsey.
Huge.
Yeah, Dave Ramsey. If people like Alex Hormozi's huge company, I'm like, Dave Ramsey makes him look like a child.
People don't know who he is. It's really funny to me, like, because I grew up in Tennessee, right? I grew up just outside of Nashville, like not far, and so like Ramsey's a massive deal. Dude. Growing up,
I knew it was a big company, but when he was talking about like what their annual revenue is, crazy. I almost shit a brick.
It's wild.
So it's crazy. It was like $300 million a year.
Well, and he owns.
Oh my God.
He owns. The rumor is he owns a hundred. I don't want to misquote, but I think he owns 100 or 200, a few $100 million in real estate outright with no debt.
Oh, I believe that wholeheartedly. I mean, because how long has he been doing
As
this?
long as he's been doing that. They've got this huge, like massive. Have you ever seen it in Nashville? You ever driven by it?
No.
If you should drive by the campus. It's just outside of Nashville. If you find yourself there with some time, just because it's massive, and they own the whole thing. Because the whole thing's no debt. So like,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
It's crazy. But all of that goes back to like you have to start with something. Now, you don't have to start with a lot, but you do have to create the habits that you would have cash on hand, that you can start to exercise some of these strategies. And I will also tell everybody, like, even when you do understand it, and even when you're playing it right, it still feels like somebody is taking your body and stretching it to the limit. And you're like, I thought I was doing this right, but this still feels like I'm playing out of my league. When you're like, I'm going to put some money in, I'm going to buy a house, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. I'm like, it still feels like that. Yeah. No matter how you do it. But once you do it a couple times, then you get to start to see the rewards of it. But man, it feels like chaos at first.
It does.
So just know that at first it starts with like, you got to have a little cash. That starts with creating a budget. And then you're going to have to learn a little bit about where can I use this to my advantage? Right. So there's number one is like, you need to budget what you have. Mm-hmm. Number two, you need to keep as much of it as you can legally. Mm-hmm. And then number three is then you got to figure out where to put it so that you can get more of it. Those are like the three basic tenets of like becoming wealthy.
So let's dig into that third point for a second, because I'm curious the way you think about this as well. So this idea of, okay, we're going to budget to get more. We're going to, try and keep more of what we got, however you said that. And then the third is, what do we do with the money? Well, the money needs to go buy assets that can then create more money for us. So the way that I have historically thought about this is that there's 5, let's call it 5, maybe 4. We'll call it 4 overarching asset classes. There's more, and this is not like Wall Street bro tech. This is like Nick True Twitter.
I think technically there's 7, but like there's 3 of them that kind of don't apply. Like,
yes. Yeah. So for the average Joe who's like, I want to go invest some money, there's real estate. There's what we would call just like securities, stocks and bonds.
Right. Stocks and bonds.
There's what I would call just like investing in other businesses. So like buying another gym or, those kinds of things. Right. And then the fourth would be, I just bucket like more speculative things. So like gold, cryptocurrency, those things. Those are the 4 that I have personally at least spent some time looking at or messing around with. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Speaking of the Ramsey Hormozi podcast, he said something in there that I thought was interesting, or Alex brought up something that Ramsey had said, which I think is very important, which is when you're thinking about what should you invest in. Dave Ramsey had told,
this is great.
Like Stefan and Hormozi took it as well and said like, well, you shouldn't just like go buy stocks because your friends do, or go buy real estate because Fern does, or go buy whatever. Like, you should think about what is your own knowledge. And then I would actually throw in like, what's your interest? Because you may not have knowledge about any of these things. So which one interests you? Because to your point, it's going to be a little bit of like almost adding another part-time job to go learn how to invest properly in these different areas. And so
for the record, going back to that, like that's my wife's interest. So so I spend 0 time there. She educates me. So I learn by osmosis because I don't have, quite frankly, like I don't have time to learn those things. Yeah. Like my thing is business. Like I want to be the best at this. And I'm like, cool. If you want to do that, I want you to be so smart at that. And she likes it. So I'm like, great, you go do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Even better if you can find a killer teammate and a spouse like that. So the idea just being like, what are you and or your spouse interested in, to the point that you're like, oh, I think I could learn the real estate game. And then inside the real estate game, there's like all these different, types of real estate. Do you want to get into, storage or short-term rentals, long-term rentals, commercial, all these things. But setting that up, my question to you, or certainly Ramsey's way of saying it was, you should invest and allocate your investing according to your skill set and interest, rather than just based on some random smorgasbord of what somebody else said was, a good way to do this. And I liked that a lot. And so I can just tell you, like, candidly, for me personally, the way that Hannah and I currently invest is, right now, the large majority of our investing and net worth is tied up in a large real estate investment that we made this last year. So we bought a mixed use building here in Tennessee that's got 2 apartments that we're short-term renting, and then downstairs is an office co-working space that's more like a commercial real estate. And over time, at least at this moment, this may change in the future, but over time, our goals for wealth building are growing our business that has value, and then using the profits from that to put roughly half of that into real estate and roughly half into like stocks and bonds and traditional stuff. And I mess around with a little bit of crypto, but it's not a huge percentage of what we're doing at the moment. And so for me, those are my interests and the things that I'm playing with. But I'm curious for you, like, when you think about taking profit off the table, how are you thinking about allocating it?
Into the 2 things that we both do. So for me, long term, it's the either acquisition or building of additional businesses. Now, those timetables are a little bit longer because I've learned a lot of my lessons the hard way, which is like shore up the ones that you have and just make them just cash flow cows so that they can just everything is faster that way. So if you can acquire businesses and plug people in to those new ones, then I don't have to spend a ton of time and resources. I just want, and the businesses that I'm looking at are all businesses that are directly adjacent and support the main one, or maybe even just more gyms, right? So think anything that would be adjacent to a CrossFit affiliate, an accounting firm, a website company, like all these other things, like anything that I would use.
I love that.
I would want to buy. And then same thing on the real estate side. Like we want to buy, that's my wife's saying, we want to buy more properties. I'm like, okay, well, what would be all the services and things that we would use to do? I'm like, well, like same thing, like a management company, like all those other things. So things that are directly adjacent to what it is that we do, or services or products that we already buy.
I love it.
That's where our focus is. So she has her lane and then I have mine. And, those plans there's like a kind of like a, call it a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year for all of those.
Okay, cool. So you guys are thinking about that as part of your visioning and planning, and sort of saying, here's kind of where we want the real estate to be. Here's kind of where we want, the CrossFit related adjacent businesses to be,
right? That
kind of thing.
Yeah. Cause I look at it as like, well, if I own all the things, the downstream savings, they're going to be cash flow positive, but then the downstream savings I have from owning all of those things is pretty significant down the line. Meaning I don't have to pay an accountant. I don't have to pay a website guy. I don't have to pay whatever. Oh my God, I just don't have those. I own the property. I don't have to pay rent anymore.
Yep.
All of a sudden my operating expense, if we go back to that screen you had before, is not 75% anymore. It's like 37%.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, well, it's real hard. It's real hard to blow it in a business with 37% operating expenses.
Totally. And it's, it's been really nice. We've owned our building for about a year, and every month my coaching business, my financial coaching business pays rent to the LLC that owns the building for our YouTube studio. Right. And it's nice. It's fun. Yeah. Like, it's really fun to see that come in and know, like, oh, it's leaving this business and going into that one. It's a thing that I would pay anyways. Yep. But now it just comes to me. Yep. Super fun.
So the big takeaway here for gym owners is, a lot of one of the major problems that we are trying to solve in Best Hour is let's fix how people run their CrossFit affiliates. And that's number one. And then there's the secondary piece of that, which is like, okay, let's make them high horsepower machines so that there is a long game to these. Because right now the long game for most CrossFit gyms is sell it because you just get tired of it, which is not a long-term game, by the way. That's just you decide to do something else. However, if you can build a gym that operates, with a GM that runs over $500,000 a year, that has a 15 to 25% profit margin, you can sell that for $1 million plus At which point that is a retirement plan. Like if you can just stick $1 million in the bank when you're 50 years old, you're doing better than most people.
Yes.
Right. Like you can now draw 4% off of that and do nothing for the rest of your life, you know? And then more importantly, let's say that you didn't do that, but now I can go do more of other things, right? Like I can take that money and I can reinvest it, whatever it's going to be, you know? So this is the long game, which is like, oh, you're never going to retire as a CrossFit gym. And I think people think that you can only essentially retire if you own the building. No, you can do a lot of things, but it's a hell of a lot easier if you own the building.
Yes.
You know, but then what else can you do with that? Right. So it may not be sell it at all. It may just collect cash off of it.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, if it just paid you $6,000 a month to just wake up and brush your teeth every morning, you have the freedom to go do whatever you want.
Yeah. And you like it, you know, you get to go in and do your thing. And
or more importantly, this is where I think most gym owners want to get to is they want to do a Legends class. They want to run youth strength and conditioning programs. They want to do something benevolent with, you know, addiction clinics or veterans or whatever. Well, this is how you get to those things.
100%.
Which is like, hey, you run a good business, you know, you create the cash flow that allows you to use your money in the right places, which is whether it's buy a building or start to build up your staff so that it frees up your time and bandwidth to then allocate that time and energy to something else, which can also be revenue generating as well. And it just becomes a compounding effect, just like money is a compounding. Time is compounding as well. If it's just my time, well, then I can only do so much with that. But if it's my time and 10 other people's time, well, we can do a lot more.
Well, and to your point, I always think, right, this is just like the oxygen mask analogy, right? Of, you know, the plane's going down, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first before you help your neighbor. If you want to do the addiction clinic, the Legends class, the youth, like all these things, you need to get your stuff healthy so that you're not just freaking out about making rent next month. Then you would actually have the bandwidth and time and, you know, all that stuff, the capacity to do all of that. So
I think, you know, and again, it all goes back to the basics, which is like, you got to have a functioning budget first. Right. And then for a lot of people, once you do this, if you have a functioning budget and you're saving for taxes and you do this intelligently one time, meaning like you had a plan, you figured out what your tax strategy was, and then you set all that tax money aside. And the day comes and they're like, you don't actually owe all those taxes. I'm like, boom, there's your egg right there to execute your first thing. Yeah. Right. So if you want to start building wealth, whether it's a down payment on a building, you know, there's plenty of gyms that are in areas where buying the building might cost them, they would need to walk up to the table with less than $100,000 as a 20% down payment. Yeah. Yeah. At which point you have changed your entire trajectory as a business. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, so I think it's really important that people understand that is that, you know, if you're doing this right, if we're going back to like how when Nick was breaking down on YNAB and you understand your percentages, you may not have to utilize that cash in the place that you had allocated for. Now I can do whatever I want with it. Yep. You know, which is the cool part.
Well, and back to this, like, I didn't even know that was something you could do. I didn't even know that was a rule that I could just do that. Right. There's almost like a putting on of new hats. Have you read The E-Myth by Michael Gerber? Yep. Like super old school. Yeah. Yep.
So I think when I read it, it was revisited. It was the
updated version.
The updated version.
Fantastic book. Anybody listening, if you haven't read that book, I would highly recommend it. I would say that, like, arguably, and this is not to insult anybody when I say this, but arguably, I think Affiliate U, what you guys are doing is helping people make the transition that book talks about, right? Is going from like the technician, correct, right? In y'all's case, the CrossFit coach, to being a business owner. Because there are different ways of thinking and there are different ways of operating. And that's what Best Hour of Their Day helps people do, is they help them make that transition. And so what we're kind of talking about in this episode is going, okay, well, when I've made that transition, now there's like one other transition to make, which is like, investor,
Right.
wealth builder, entrepreneur, like where we're thinking bigger and going like, cool, now I've made the transition from just being a coach to being an owner. And now I'm now going, okay, well, I've got this thing cruising. Where do I go from here? How do I build wealth from here? And now we're putting on our investing hat.
There's actually, more practically speaking, there's an interim step in there. So there in and the budget is hindsight is 2020 is a significantly larger contributor to making the 3 jumps. So call it coach, general manager, owner.
Yep.
So in that order is how most people will rise through the affiliate. And many people could get from coach to GM. Right. A lot don't, but many can. Right. Going from GM to owner requires an entirely different set of skills. One of which means you need to really, really understand your cash flow.
Yeah.
Because if I am going to move up to that next level, I'm going to really need to understand how to build a team. Guess what? That team is going to cost you money. And if you have no idea what you can pay people or how big of a team you can make, you are going to be in trouble, and you will never end up making that third step. You will bounce up there for a little bit because you think you have it, and you'll find yourself back into the GM role. And then you'll try it and you'll get back because you really didn't understand budgeting and a whole host of other things, right? Like team building, sales, all these other things. But that third one is really hard because you have to develop an entirely new set of skills, and the budget is a huge component of that. And then you have to learn to do things through other people, which money is a huge component of that, is a huge part of that. At which point, when you can comfortably sit in that owner role, now you can also think about, okay, well, if I'm here, well, now what do I do?
Yeah.
Right. That becomes the question. And you can invest in a lot of different ways. You could purchase other businesses. You could buy assets to then put your business in, at which point that changes again. And now I get to play that game. But there's 3 steps in there inside of a CrossFit gym. Yeah. That specifically, just because of where they start, the size, and we're talking about most CrossFit gyms. There's some that definitely violate this, where they crush and they can kind of skip that middle step. It's very few. Let's call it like a fraction of a percent. Most of them will fall in that 3-step process.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense to me. So anything else you want to say on this investing?
No, I just
do with extra money?
We've talked about a lot here, and really I hope what people take away from this is like, because I know people talk about this all the time. They're like, fuck, all right, well, yes, I want to work on the business, and I want to be an entrepreneur, and I want to be able to invest and buy assets and use all the buzzwords and leverage and all of those things. It comes back to where we've started this series of podcasts, is like, you need to understand your cash flow.
You have to.
Right. In business, money solves a lot of problems.
Yep.
Right. It is also the source of almost 100% of your problems.
Yeah.
So if you can learn to manage that, you can start to make your way up there. And it starts with the basics, which is like, get a functioning budget in place. Figure out where your cash is going and why.
Yeah.
And determine whether that is where you want it to go. And if it's not, make the changes. Then you map out where it is that you'd like to be, and you create the habits and you build the muscles in order to do that over time. You become a significantly smarter business person. If I plopped you in any business at that point, you can go in there and manage cash flow. And then I can start to problem solve, or I can project into the future, and I can kind of future pace myself and say, well, okay, where would I want to be? Okay, here's where I want to be. Here's what I want to do. And I can start mapping that out. And then I get there. And then if I'm doing all of those things, I've probably mapped out the following steps from there as well. But it starts with, you have to have a budget. You need to understand the discipline required to get where you want to go is cost of entry.
Have to. It's the foundation of everything. Like if we don't have those numbers, we can't even have any of the conversations that we're having. So. It's
crazy the number of people that you and I deal with that have no idea. It's not crazy. It's the norm.
It's normal.
Quite frankly.
Yeah,
it's the norm. And so I think it's crazy now because I realize how silly it is, having been that previous version. we're just like, how did I even survive at all?
Yeah.
Not doing any of those things.
I haven't ever used this analogy before, but it just hit me and I was like, oh man, it really is like that. Do you remember the moment that you needed to start wearing deodorant?
Oh, that's a good question.
I do.
Had to have been high school. I don't, but I get where you're
my
going
mom
with this. Yeah.
told me, and I was so embarrassed about it. I remember riding in the car with her, and she was very nice. She wasn't like mean about it, but it was still just like. And I remember her being like, "Hey, Nick, so you're kind of at the point now where you got a little body odor, and I'm going to start buying you some deodorant, and you need to start wearing it every day." And I felt I was like, "What?" Like I was so embarrassed by it, but. Now, I know this is like a dumb analogy, but like I can't imagine having a day where I don't put deodorant on. Right? Like it's just part of the way that I live my life. And it would be ridiculous to me.
It's like brushing your teeth. You're like, you don't brush your teeth? Like, that's gross. I'm like, you don't operate a budget? I'm like, that's gross.
That's gross. 100%. And that's where you're like, beforehand, I would just live my life. I didn't use deodorant. I didn't know that. I didn't even know I needed deodorant. It's fine. I was getting by, and then now that I use deodorant, I'm like, oh man, I feel bad for my friends before that moment,
I do remember with like, when I figured out like I didn't know what I was doing with finance, which is hilarious because I have an economics degree. I was a supply officer in the Navy. That's what you do. But that actually set me up for failure because you're dealing with the government's money. It doesn't, nothing matters there. It's like, just spend it. All you really had to do was account for it. You didn't have to like save any of it. It didn't matter where. Listen, that's the truth. That's how federal budgets work.
It is.
That is the unfortunate truth of the gross waste, fraud, and abuse that is the federal government.
Yeah.
It is just get all your money and spend 110% of it.
And you better spend all of it, because if you don't spend all of it, you won't get as much next year.
It is the most insanely backward system that I have ever been a part of. We're just like, if you were fiscally responsible, this is not a joke, everybody. So if he thinks I'm joking about this is the absolute truth. If you did not overspend on your budget, you would be penalized. Think about how crazy that is. So when people are like, what's all this money? I'm like, this is why the system is the way that it is, because that is how the federal government operates. Yeah. So then when I got to the private sector, I got slapped with a whole dose of reality, which is like, yeah, you'll be broke in 5 months.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, I think I find often that the more complex people's jobs are in their day life, the more they think they don't need a budget. Like they're like, oh man, I manage like tons of money at the company I work for. I don't need to budget myself. I do that. It's like, no. So
the more complex, the more structure you need.
Yeah.
That'd be like rolling into a class and be like, oh, 30 people? I don't need a plan. I only need to plan when there's one. I'm like, that literally makes no sense.
It makes zero sense. Yeah.
Makes zero sense. So I hope everybody is kind of understanding what we're talking about here, and I hope you got something out of the tax stuff, because that's a huge component of it, right? That is one that has set me back in over the years many times, where we thought we were making headway because we didn't understand that we either had a bad accountant or it was miscommunicated or whatever, and they're like, oh, we have this, and then the government came and they're like, yeah, we'll take that from you, thank you very much.
We'll take all of it, thank you.
We'll take all of it. And I'm like, literally back to square one.
Yeah.
And we did that many times. It was infuriating, and then we had to go through this process of like, all right, we need to be more literate here. And like I said, it was probably like a 2-year process before we could call ourselves like somewhat literate. We're like, okay, I understand where I'm making mistakes first. And then it's like, okay, well, now how do I fix this? And then you have to understand, like, fixing that is going to take you a minimum of 12 months, probably closer to 24, in order to realize the fruits of making those changes moving forward. So it's not, you got to settle in for the ride on that. But if you're owning a gym, you got to figure those two things out, because you can create longevity inside of the CrossFit affiliate for yourself, for your staff, and for all of your members, moving into the future. And it all comes back to this. It seems silly, but it all comes back to this.
Yep. It's the foundation for everything. And so hopefully we've maybe inspired you to paint a picture of like where things go and where things get really fun down the road.
Yeah.
And there's lots of moments of like, holy crap, I didn't even know you could do that. To come, but it starts with the foundation. So go back, listen to the other episodes if you haven't in this series, and get your foundation in order, and then be patient. Like Fern said, it takes time, and so just get the foundation in order, get the routines in place, and then just hang on.
If you're struggling with money, if this sounds at all appealing to you, this is probably one of the more impactful things that we do with affiliate owners. So if you're interested in how all of this works, how we are working with affiliate owners to help them keep all of their cash on hand, run better affiliates, pay better coaches, reach out, Affiliate U. We'd love to set up a call with you. Just talk, no obligation for anything. But this is a huge problem, and it's one of the first things that we solve for people because it's the most important if we want to have the compounding effect outlined. So reach out. We'd love to chat with you, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for checking out this episode of the Best Hour of Their Day podcast. We appreciate you listening and choosing to have us help you in your passion for coaching and affiliate ownership. You can find more episodes just like this on all podcast platforms. If you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to us on any social media platforms, or you can visit www.besthouroftheirday.com to book a call. If you found this episode helpful for you, please share it so that we can help other coaches and affiliate owners to help build a bigger and stronger CrossFit community. Thanks for listening.